welcome to a special roundtable edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. And the topic today is economy. After taking a downward trend for a few years, China's real GDP growth has stabilized recently. Positive data in the first half of the year 2017 regarding manufacturing activity, retail sales and exports surprised forecasters, causing several large international institutions such as the International Monetary Fund to upgrade their forecasts for China's economic growth. So how has their fear of a hard landing shifted towards a more bullish viewpoint regarding China's economy? And what are likely to be the driving forces of China's economy in the next 5 years? Joining me for the discussion today are He Weiwen, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, David Mahon, Managing Director of Mahon China Investment Management Limited, and Yiming, Chief Advisor of Metro Transit Railway China Business. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
First of all, shall we take a look at some interesting statistics, a chart which details China's GDP growth for the last 5 years. Let's take a look at the overall trend. I think that's more vivid. Shall we take a look at the big screen, China's GDP growth rate from 2012 to 2017? These statistics come from the National Bureau of Statistics of China. So the highest point, I would say somewhere in 2012, we registered 7.9%, almost 8%, but ever since then, China's economic growth has been slowing down to the lowest point of about 6.7% around 2016, and now it seems to be picking up speed a little bit. So, gentlemen, what does that say about China's economic performance and the health of the Chinese economy over the past 5 years?
Well,
Yiming?
Well, if I see that, because I'm not expert talking about this, but I use my common sense. In the last 5 years, obviously it's slowing down, but I see this very positively because in the past 10 years or more than decades, high growth rate. I like use this as the teenagers. So the teenagers, high growth, and then to be more robust and more healthy, we're looking for maybe more organic growth, more stronger or more sort of robust structure growth. So what I can see is optimistic.
Okay, so it's a good sign that things are slowing down, but in better shape, possibly.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, David. How does this line look to you?
I agree. I think that this is a sign of consolidation of the economy. In fact, you could argue in 2012 China was growing too quickly. There was too much stimulus in the economy, and there was too much investment in infrastructure. This is now not so much the case, and we're in a more consumer-driven economy. People are wealthier, people are spending more, so there's a general consolidation, almost as one would look in part at a developed economy. I mean, the coastal provinces of China together, you could say, are a developed economy, with an internal and western and northeastern economy that are developing. So we actually could do with some even slower growth again. I say we could go down to even 5.5 and still be healthy. So it's not about the pace, and it's not about the pace and rate of growth, it's the quality of growth.
Yeah.
That's right. Quality is key word.
Yeah. Mr. He, your initial thoughts?
Yes, I quite agree with those the two gentlemen, and I would like to add something from the statistical point. We see that over the past 5 years, the growth rate has lost one percentage point, from the highest 7.9 to the most recent 6.9. The reason lies in the change of the contribution by investment. In the past, investment was so heavy that it contributed usually to about 4 percentage points to the growth. But now, with the decline benefits and of investment, so it has contributed less than 3 percentage points. That's a very important point, causing the decline of the growth rates. Another important point is the net export. Because in the past, net export usually contributed to half a percentage point to as high as more than 1 percentage point. But in the past 2 years, we saw a negative growth in exports. So it contributed negatively. But now, since the start of this year, again, the net export contributed positively.
Yeah.
So if it contributed 0.1 percentage point to GDP growth, it has made a difference. So that's why the growth rate is up again.
Yeah, some people are saying, look, China's growth rate has been slowing down bit by bit, but now it seems to be picking up again. It's almost like a spoon shape. What does that say about the Chinese economy? Are we entering another cycle of relatively high growth?
I think that there is a better situation globally. China's been in a very moribund global environment over most of these years, and China is not independent of the global economy. So in a sense, some improvement for exports particularly is a reflection of an improving American market.
Yes.
And also Europe at last is coming out of the doldrums that it experienced from the global financial crisis. So these exterior factors are important, but fundamentally, rather than tracking GDP growth, one should be tracking the actual quality of growth, and the shift away from investment to consumption has been one of the major shifts, which means that China has its own domestic economic engines.
Basically, you're saying the Chinese economic activity is even more vibrant than the number we are seeing.
I don't think it's a higher GDP number, but I think consumption is a greater portion of the number than we are seeing.
I see.
And also the quality of the GDP, as David earlier said. I think also we need to look at the infrastructure investment here. Compared to 5 years, 10 years ago, we have more investment on this one. So like high-speed train, like underground, metro tubes, and also that kind of investment. Also the property related to the urbanization. That chunk, I believe, is a real growth recently.
Yeah. So is that the reason why China has avoided the so-called hard landing people have been predicting for the Chinese economy all along, basically?
There never was going to be a hard landing.
No.
And you mentioned the IMF. Well, we think back to the global financial crisis. We think back to the major commentators on the global economy. All of them, one, missed the global financial crisis. And then the chaos after the global financial crisis and the issues that countries faced, these rating agencies, even the IMF, struggled to come to terms with how to actually quantify what had happened. So I would, rather than look to international agencies and rather than look to a comparative situation of China to Western economies, it's better to look to Chinese economic history. And you go back 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and track the growth and changes that have taken place there. And there you see a very healthy picture of urbanization. You see the growth of the middle class. You see a quality increase across the board in industry. I mean, even the textile sector that has been shrinking considerably is now consolidating and stabilizing because it is more sophisticated, there is more high technology involved, and it's beginning to produce more products that actually carry a strong profit margin.
Wow.
The cheap stuff has gone to other countries.
So it's a rather rosy picture in your eyes, but how come people have always been sounding the alarm saying, look, China has these underlying problems, for instance, the debt, the high debt, and they're saying, this is like a huge time bomb that's going to explode any time. Mr. He?
Yes, we have a lot of problems in our economy. And some of the problems are very serious. We must be highly vigilant against that. I think one of the most important things we have to pay enough attention to is the financial risks, especially, for instance, the high leverage. The overall debt ratio to GDP by the end of last year was 250%, total China, households, government, and corporate. And the corporate debt rate, non-financial sector, is 166%. It's pretty high.
What should be the healthy level? Is there a...
I don't know. It varies from country to country. But in China, you see, in the past 20 years, many foreign economists they have estimated some serious problem in China. There might be even hard landing or even crash in China. But it never happened because we have good management. And the first, corporate debt mostly to domestic owners instead of external debt. But because of the external exposure of our debt rate is pretty low compared to many developed countries even. So it's a problem of adjustment in the country. Of course, it's still very hard. It's very difficult to go with. An important thing is we should ask the local governments to do less to support those zooming enterprises, to let the market decide how to do.
Oh, that's a different topic now, but still staying with the debt problem, Mr. Yi, what is your observation? How big is a challenge for Chinese economy?
In my field, what I can see, the current public service sector, we are using the so-called PPP model, the private and public partnership model. And local government, sometimes they are using this PPP model as finance model only. So actually the public service model is not only just finance. So what happens if you are doing the local, for instance, the public service project? The finance is only one function. It's not all functions. But however, the people, using this model as the more financing model and, chunking money and invest, does alert us, if everybody doing the same thing, that's something, happen. I'm worried about that.
Has the central government taken heed of this problem? Is there anything being done to, adjust that, to properly use this PPP in the future?
For sure. Recently, the government put a lot of effort to try to issue regulations and also some educations to local people and the government. But still, you can see, because we just talk about the new economy, market like public service. This is a huge market in future, like infrastructure, healthcare, education, even national defense. This is a big market.
But I think one of the things with debt is there has been an inordinate amount built up on the four main banks that have been, in a sense, obliged to lend to municipalities, to lend to provinces. So the bulk of the debt that we're calculating is actually, in some form, perhaps 60% of it is on a state balance sheet. And that can be worked out over time. It's not debt that has to be dealt with this quarter or this year. Asset management companies are now being created all across China. In medium-sized cities, you have asset management companies taking the non-performing loans from the banks, and the banks themselves are now under much stricter regime than they have been in previous years. So the big question has been, is this government a reform-minded government? It's slow to put things into practice because of the scale of the economy. But the clear indication is new appointments, particularly in the financial and banking sector, shows that Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang are appointing reformers. They are beginning to restrain the economy. So a lot of this money that's being built up as debt has been in the municipal sector, beautifying cities, perhaps building an extra runway or aspect of infrastructure that mightn't be necessary right at the moment. So we basically, in our business, we restructure companies that foreigners have invested in that get into trouble. So we're getting with the worst companies normally in each city. And we're in, any day, 5 or 6 different provinces. We notice actually that the bulk of the industrial sector is pretty healthy. So now that this level of credit restraint means the banks will be gradually over the next 2 years in a better and better situation. There are issues, and the biggest risks are financial, but they're being dealt with.
Again, this spoon-shaped growth, how has that affected China's interaction with other countries, besides the import and export that we have seen shifting over the past years? How have foreign businesses doing business in China or with Chinese companies in different countries, how have they been impacted by this slower growth in China, David?
I'm from New Zealand, so that's where I spend a fair bit of time. But also the bulk of our clients come from Europe. And we see a universal fear of China.
Universal
fear.
Fear of China.
Because
why?
There is an expectation either China's growing too quickly, and therefore they're going to become too strong, and they'll own too many of our assets, or China isn't growing fast enough, and we can't sell to them. And normally it's in one camp or the other. And one of the problems is there's a lack of good economic and financial information in the Western media. There is a general filter through which China is seen, which is negative. Either it's a fear of China's strength, or there is a fear that knowing that perhaps Europe and America are no longer such drivers of the global economy, perhaps China is failing to be. So there's a lack of balance, there's a lack of objectivity.
They need to watch more CGTN to get more balanced information. Yeah, Mr. He and Mr. Yi, what are your reaction to what David said just now?
I think they are in a contradictory sentiment. First, on the one hand, the growing Chinese economy, of course, is providing a growing market for them. Good opportunities, especially in the consumption and the middle class growing. That's a good. On the other hand, I have read over the reports and also talked with the business people from Europe and America recently. And what they worry is the market investment environment in China, whether the foreign investor could be treated equally in the China market.
Have they been treated
we say that, yeah, we are equal, but they say sometimes they are not treated, not as that welcome as 20 years ago, because they think maybe China thinks that we are strong enough.
We don't need the foreign.
I think they're right. Because,
are they right? Yeah, David?
China grew through this remarkable partnership with the Western, or the global economy led by the United States.
Yeah.
And China was then the most open developing country that history had ever seen. I mean, you look at the brands that were established here, Johnson & Johnson, Volkswagen, you look at Procter & Gamble. I mean, this was the best market in the world for quite a while for multinational companies.
Yeah. But it cannot be always like that, right? I think it's just not possible to expect any economy to keep,
And it's not necessarily that reciprocal. I mean, there are many barriers. Any country that can erect barriers does. Whatever trade agreements, whatever globalization is being a sort of driving thinking of any country, there are always barriers and protectionism. So it's been hard for Chinese companies to buy businesses in Europe, for instance. The American investment market requires quite a few tariff barriers if you're exporting to it, but if you're investing in many of these foreign countries, it's not as straightforward as it may seem. So yes, China needs to improve the balance of the market, but not just for foreign companies. I'd argue that if you are a company in China, the problems you face, you share with Chinese companies. Sometimes there are monopoly interests. Sometimes there are inefficiencies and distortions in the market. So it isn't just a foreign Chinese thing. I think most foreign companies are here because they have made money and are going on making money.
Yeah, Yiming, your observation?
Well, for my more than 3 decades multinational company management, I would say this way. Actually, in China in future, we shouldn't have foreign company, private company, state-owned company. I mean, the boundary should be less and less. This is what reform is talking about, right, in future. But today, I used a term earlier, like a teenager growth. Foreign company or multinational company, same thing. Because 30 years, 20 years ago, the foreign company invests in China, the growth rate is very high, double digit, okay? But today, slowing down. But we also think both Chinese market and the foreign company and multinational companies need to think what is the quality transformation in future. Also for the state-owned company and private company that are going abroad, also they need to think what is transformation from, just the investment and the growth to more quality organic growth. This is the same to foreign company, state-owned company, and the Chinese market.
When you say quality growth, quality is a word that a lot of people are talking about these days, but what exactly should people be looking for? I mean, what do you mean by quality, for instance?
For instance, if we say a country, today China is the second largest GDP in the world. However, if you look at public service, I mean, healthcare and, transportation, infrastructure, and other sort of so-called public service sector compared to the developed country,
Environment.
That's right. Environment.
Mm-hmm.
Still, we be far way behind. So this is what I'm talking about, quality.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're talking about economy in future, I believe this is a big chunk for investment and growth.
Mm-hmm. But David, again, for foreign businesses operating in China, are they willing, or have they realized that they need to change their mindset maybe a little bit, and instead of expecting the same astronomical growth that they have been experiencing over the past 2-3 decades to continue and look at it slightly different way?
I think the mindset is very much the last 3 decades, but also there was always the colonial mindset. And when you're white from a European background, my heritage is largely from the British Isles, although 6 generations in New Zealand, there is that sense that for 300 more years, people look like me around the world. And it's very hard for these companies to get thinking out of their minds and see themselves as participants in an economy, rather than people coming into this economy with advantage, coming into this economy with an assumption of some sort of superiority. Either their products are superior, management is superior. It's about being here and being part of this economy as an individual, as a human being.
Yeah.
I think that's a thing of mindset that Western firms still would not admit too often, but it's still very, very strong in their thinking.
Wow. Coming from you, I think such a statement is really very, very powerful. The 2 Chinese gentlemen, how do you look at the importance of the 19th Party Congress to businesses, both domestic and foreign, and to the commercial nationalism?
Oh, I do looking for the more leadership from the 19th NPC, because if you look at the history, I heard recently the 19th NPC will give more the updating the party constitution. For instance, in the 15th, we say the Deng Xiaoping theory.
We added Deng Xiaoping theory into the party.
The 16th, we say 3 represents. And the 17th, we say the scientific outlook. Okay? But I'm looking for the new leadership for the new China era, because we're often talking about China now is in the new stage, in the world arena, in the world stage. So the new leadership must be something. I'm looking for the new sort of a presentation, new illustration for the Communist Party's new leadership slogan or theory.
What kind of impact is that going to have on the economy?
Well, for instance, if we are talking about more quality investment, more quality development, then we must follow some leadership from this Congress, right? So I believe in the next decades, I'm quite optimistic for the public service and also the so-called quality of life, China.
Mr. He?
Yes, I think the 19th Party Congress is at a very important historical point, because after the 19th Party Congress, it will cover next 5 years. And next 5 years will cover exactly the first centenary goal. That is, we'll attain the overall well-being society in China by 2020, and before the first 100th anniversary of the party. So in order to hit that, first, a relatively high, medium-high growth rate must be maintained, 6.5 at least, before 2020, to double the real GDP, real personal income in the 10 years, starting from 2010 to 2020. So we could expect the 19th Party Congress will uphold the necessary medium-high growth rate to hit well-being, overall well-being society by 2020. Then, not only for next 5 years, but I believe that the 19th Party Congress will evolve the broad vision for next 30 years until the second centenary. So the broad way, blueprint, how China's economy could develop.
Yeah.
First, it covered Made in China 2020, and then artificial intelligence by 2030. Then by then, China will be even a leader in the world. So in chart that way, 2 things are most important. I believe the 19th Party Congress will certainly decide. First, firmly reform, overall deepening reform only by reform can we liberalize the driving forces of the economy. Second, we should open further our door to welcome the resources of the whole world, welcome investors and companies from different parts of the world to push forward China's economy.
Yeah, if everything stays on track, right, where we have seen, for instance, this kind of a relatively stable growth China can maintain over the next 5-10 years, then I think our goals are attainable. But what are the risks we need to be watch out for, David? What do you think?
I think the risks are that the leadership stops listening to the people, because this is the People's Republic of China. And the real driver of this whole 30 years of extraordinary economic growth and change and deepening has been because of the aspirations and the struggles of ordinary people in their working lives and running businesses. These are the forces that are going to drive the future. What the party is good at doing is acknowledging the change. And it's like the helmsman, you just touch the helm. The boat is really moving in a direction that it's being driven. The party just brushes the helm very, very lightly. And I think it's that light hand that is going to be required, because these are natural organic forces. They're not made by policy necessarily. So what we want to hear from the 19th Party Congress is an understanding of where we are now, a real cognizance of where China is at the moment. I think that in recent years there has been a sense, and the anti-corruption campaign has played a major role in this, that this is a government that does listen to the people, that does understand what affects people's lives most directly. So I think I look to the Congress in terms of a level of recognition. Of course, a lot of things can always affect that. There could be financial crises that are internal, there could be bank collapses, natural disasters, global issues. All these things are possible. No one can really predict the future.
No.
But the direction, I think, is good. So as long as the party has a good understanding of the country that it guides, we're in good hands.
Yeah, Yiming?
Well, what I see, the Chinese economy, the advantage is the market, the huge market. And also the disadvantage is also the market. So we're also talking about political economy, right? So first of all, I believe if we have a political stable, that's the most important thing. And then we have a big market. As long as we manage the market demands and also we have supply, I think we are optimistic.
Okay. Well, time is up. We have to go. Many thanks, gentlemen, for this short but insightful discussion. I've been talking to He Wei-wen, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, David Mahon, Managing Director of Mahon China Investment Management Limited, and Yiming, Chief Advisor of Metro Transit Railway China Business. And that is it for this special edition of Roundtable Discussion under the title, The Point, with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Twitter or Facebook using the handle The Point with LX, or download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching.